Welcome to one casual retail player's journey back into...
Get out of the way. Hello everyone, I'm back to do this Warcraft thing. I did start doing a series, but learned very quickly that I am just a little guy, a small bean, a little tiny fleck of poo on the boot of YouTube, so no one really cared about going back and watching the previous episode. And two, keeping things going is hard, isn't it? And I think I'm more of a one-shot kind of guy. So with that in mind, and an absolute fuck ton of WoW retail and classic footage burning a hole on my hard drive, let me tell you about the journey that I've been having over the last 3 months when I decided to once again play through WoW
Vanilla Classic.
And then having many confusing thoughts about the two versions of the game. So,
let's fucking go!
So just to give you the quick
Previously on Angerfarts TV.
I played the game when it originally launched. I was shit at it, steered with the A and D keys, didn't know anything about the concept of skill rotation, didn't really get the whole social side of things, although a friend did take me through some dungeons, and I just slowly toiled away on my own a lot of the time and got to level 40-ish, and then probably stopped playing because I went outside to get pissed with friends and didn't want to pay for game time when I could be spending my money on booze and drugs. Skip forward to like 2014 or 15, and I bought a PlayStation 4 and started to get into games that weren't FIFA or Football Manager. One of those was the Elder Scrolls Online, which I then played religiously for a year or two, and then switched over to Destiny 2, and so got back into the concept of logging in each day to a digital world. Skip forward a bit more to perhaps late 2018, early 2019, and I decided to have a go on modern day WoW again. I played through Battle for Azeroth for a while, made a few alts, and then cancelled my subscription for a bit when the whole breast milk fiasco happened, and I was getting a bit bored of it. Then a pandemic happened and Shadowlands came out, and no one had anything better to do, so I started playing again, and that's when I got proper back into it. Of course, Shadowlands was a giant pile of shit, but as I mentioned on a number of occasions, I am an altaholic, and that coupled with finding the time walking feature meant I started playing back through all the expansions and experiencing everything I had missed in those in-between years. So from then till now, I have had a rolling subscription to WoW, and in general became a big fan of the mmorpg genre overall, even finding my other big love, Guild Wars 2. But in early 2025, I decided that I wanted to start playing WoW Classic again. The anniversary server was being released, and it was the perfect time to really give it a go and see why so many people would shun the retail version just to play Vanilla Classic. Just in case some people are watching this that haven't played WoW, World of Warcraft, what a strange thing to do. What are you doing here? Don't go. Stick around and perhaps you too can give yourself the brain damage required to start playing this genre of games. But when I refer to retail, I am talking about the most up-to-date current version of the game as it stands today. When I talk about classic, I am talking about the game as it was at some point in the past, depending on the expansion. So Vanilla Classic is the original game as it was when it first released in 2004. Got it? Good. Moving on. Now, I had given Classic a go prior to 2025, but I will be brutally honest, after playing retail for a few years, the graphics just sort of drove me away, along with the incredibly slow pace, and I binned it off and went back to doing gymnastics in retail. But this time I was mentally ready and sufficiently compelled to give it another proper go. I mean, there had to be a reason why people liked it so much. That, and I am rapidly growing older and older, and let me tell you what, younglings, when you get into your 40s, looking back on your experiences and nostalgia seems to play a massive part in your life. And if you don't feel like that and you're in your 40s, then fucking tell me your secrets, because I would love to not have to think about the never-ending march of time and the slide towards the grave and the ultimate cosmic end of everything. But this time was different. So what are my thoughts on the OG? First of all, I won't be talking about endgame. That is something people with actual experience can tell you about. I'm here to talk about the actual game and everything before that point of endgame. Well, first and foremost, it is a lot slower, and that felt really fucking weird after playing retail for so long. But after a while, I actually started to settle into the pace and enjoy the fact that you couldn't just race through. Very early on, I found out that you can't just be steaming into every encounter. I had to appraise the situation. How many enemies were there? Could I pull one away from the group and pick them off? Often, this results in me fleeing for my life, often directly into a pack of murlocs. How much of this was to do with the fact that I was used to retail? Probably a lot. It certainly didn't help that you have to watch your resources much more than in retail, so I would often fall prey to reflexively targeting the next enemy once out of trouble and then getting wrecked because I didn't have enough mana or bullets. Of course, as well as this, there is always the ever-present general skill and concentration issues, but all of this to say, you gotta pay attention. This also means that every little chunk of XP is well and truly earned, and so each level achieved feels really meaningful. I play a lot of Guild Wars 2, and I do genuinely love the horizontal structure it provides. But I would be lying if I didn't say that the lizard part of my brain does also really enjoy a more linear progression. Who can truly resist the dopamine hit of another little ding as that XP bar ticks over into the next level? And talking about having to earn things, you literally have to earn money to buy the skills from the skill trainer. And those cash money dollarinos don't come easy. You gotta scrape together every fucking tooth, every patch of fur, shit leather boot and piece of trash, just so that you can sell it to the vendor. The skills don't just pop up onto your bar like retail, you'll have to make the decisions as to which skill you need to buy first, because you probably won't have enough money for all of them at the same time. This also adds to the slower pace of progression, but when you do purchase that new skill, or the next level of an existing skill, they do genuinely feel more powerful when you put it to use. You find yourself making plans for the future, which skill I'm saving for, or when I hit that level I can get that, which will mean I can do this, and so on and so forth. And this all means that you are required to learn more about the game as you go along. When every little gain is a massive help to your overall progress, it is worth taking the time to try and learn and understand everything, and the pace at which it forces you to play facilitates this. And you aren't having your hand held through the questing either. The quests require you to pay attention, to read the quest description for clues and guidance, to look for landmarks to ensure that you are going in the right direction to your objective, which was extremely irritating at first, but started to, dare I say, feel good after a while. And this isn't rocket science really, it is a simple facet of human psychology that you will appreciate something more and get more satisfaction from your achievements the harder you worked for it, providing there isn't too much friction of course. put a pin in that for later. The game is legitimately challenging to the uninitiated noob, and even for the retail playing tourist slowly trundling around this old world, which is probably quite a large part of why this version of the game is so well regarded and loved still to this day. The challenge exists from the start and runs throughout the entire game like words for a stick of rock. Unlike retail, where it feels that the challenge may have been moved to endgame with activities like Mythic Plus. The skill tree system is much more interesting with much more freedom for creating unique hybrid builds. You can choose where to apply your points across the various disciplines. For example, with my hunter, I can put points into beast mastery to beef up my pet and make them more tanky, but then spend points on marksmanship to increase my damage dealing capabilities. I could also throw points into survival skills if I wanted to. It probably wouldn't make me particularly competitive, and there will always be a most effective setup and distribution of points, but fuck the min-maxers and the guides. I have the freedom to do whatever I want, and I like that. There feels like there is more depth to the systems, even though there are probably more systems in retail. But sometimes simplicity is the best answer. Creating complexity out of a relatively simple system is, to my mind, a sign of good design. Sure, it isn't perfect, but maybe that is more of a balance issue than general bad design. Maybe I'm wrong, that's always a possibility, but this is how it feels to me. So I played mostly as a hunter because that is my go-to in any mmorpg if the class exists, and was also the first class I sort of mained when I played all those years ago. But I did spend a not insignificant amount of time leveling a druid to level 33 and a paladin to 18 and a few more little tests with fighters, priests and mages, and while there is plenty of stuff to get distracted in the leveling and character build process, I found the hunter provided an immense amount of extra tasks associated with improving your build. For instance, the periodic side quests to train your pet. Each time I wanted to upgrade a certain pet skill or teach Rumham a new one, I would have to find out which animal had that skill at a level that I could tame, go and stable Rumham, journey to wherever that pet exists, find it and tame it. Use it until the new skill is learned, bin that pet off and go back to the stable master and then get Rumham back and then teach him that new skill. And your pet has training points that it earns through leveling with you and its loyalty level, which is increased by time and feeding it. And resource management is definitely a thing for hunters in Classic. You gotta have your bullets and keep your ammo pouch topped up. You gotta have a pocket full of ham and cheese to feed to your pig or whatever pet you choose. And this is admittedly very annoying at first. More in the sense of the ammo pouch, I think, but it really became an enjoyment in a strange sort of way. Not just because it created another incremental system whereby you can start using different bullet types as you level up, which do more damage, and also not because it provided a more realistic experience, that being that you have to have bullets to use in a gun and they don't just magically manifest infinitely like in retail, but more in the way that combining them with the pet training and the feeding and everything else, it all adds up to that sense of achievement, which is beginning to be a bit of a theme here. Fun little embarrassing factoid about my time playing Classic and a little demonstration of how my brain is filled with strawberry jelly is that I got to level 18 with my hunter before I even realised that you had to train your pet. Such was my retail brain. I even went off at level 18 and started leveling a druid to be a tank because I was just finding everything too hard as the hunter and kept dying. It didn't feel like I remember the hunter class and felt really squishy. So as I said, I leveled a druid to 33 before I decided that maybe I should go back and look at my hunter again and read a few guides and try and find out if it was something I was doing wrong. And wouldn't you know, it was. After I trained my pet, everything changed and suddenly Rumham was fucking shit up and I was right there behind him, shooting things in the face with my bang bang stick. I started the endeavour insisting that I would learn all I needed from the game, but pretty soon I yeeted that idea into the sea and made good use of the guide sites. God knows what it must have been like in the original days. You have had to teach each other in the game. Perish the thought. But to be honest, I really think that playing Classic has made me better at the game overall, and perhaps even better at retail as well. For example, another thing I didn't use before was combining Control plus a number for my second skill bar and having the sort of 10 most regularly used skills loaded to the left hand side of my action bars, so it made me able to be more responsive when in combat. Because playing a more challenging version of the game forced me to think about and find better ways to play. So don't I feel like an idiot that over the various years I have played WoW in whatever form, I never once made the connection that I should do that. Or rather, I did, but I sort of just wanted to ignore it because I am lazy perhaps. Better late than never, I guess. One thing that genuinely feels quite special about the Classic Anniversary servers is just standing around in Stormwind and seeing the sheer amount of people knocking about. Properly warms your heart and brings back a lot of good memories, even for a casual like me. Sure, you get loads of people running about in the main hubs in the latest expansion, but usually it feels like everyone has rushed to the end game, whereas seemingly wherever I go and whatever zone I am in there is always someone else around in Classic, and often many people in fact. I don't know if this is a side product of levelling generally taking a lot longer, which means people are in the levelling process longer, but it feels way more populated, which is in opposition to retail, where I'm aware that people are around, but it feels like you bump into them more in the central hubs rather than out in the wild, and you will almost never need to actually team up with anyone. Which brings me on to my next point. The more challenging nature of how the game is designed encourages casual teamwork in the overworld. And I use the word casual, but that probably isn't the best descriptor, as while these alliances are formed fairly casually and organically, they are formed with a small amount of effort. You enter into a pact knowing that you both sort of need each other. Sure, in many cases, you could slowly grind away by yourself, but as they say, teamwork makes the dream work, and a problem shared is a problem halved. If you are in an area, there is a high likelihood that anyone else killing mobs there is either doing the same quests as you or doing adjacent quests where it would benefit you both to team up. And often little conversations start. I'm not saying these are stimulating deep conversations, perhaps more cordial and polite, but the game does promote a certain level of civility to prevail. Because you need them and they need you, and it doesn't pay to be a dick. And this is coming from a self-proclaimed solo player. I don't necessarily like socialising with randoms in-game, but a lot of that may actually come from my retail experience, where the only time you interact with anyone is when you get matched up in a dungeon finder and thrown into a dungeon with some randoms who immediately charge off, skip past optional bosses and mobs of enemies, and treat dungeons as a chore to get out of the way rather than a challenge to enjoy and overcome together. I'll carry on my thoughts about the more social aspect of the original game, but this also gives me a chance to start talking about the dungeons in vanilla. In short, they are great, and I found the ones I played genuinely enjoyable. I have some gripes which we'll get to, but we're doing praise right now, so let's keep on that positivity track. Getting to your first dungeon feels like a real milestone. The design of the dungeons felt way more rewarding than any of the recent dungeons I have participated in retail, sort of less throwaway, owing in no small part to how you need to approach them in a much more methodical way. Not to mention how long it takes you to actually get through them. They also, particularly in the case of the Dead Mines, feel more woven into the general story, feeling like they're taking you to the end of an arc that has naturally been building as you adventure all throughout Westfall and from ever since you started in Northridge. Now, this may be the case in newer expansions, that they are tied into other quests you do while adventuring in the new zones and tied it to the overall main story, But as someone that doesn't really pay attention to story as much, the fact that the whole Van Cleef storyline settled into my mind passively as I played, whereas the Dragonflight dungeons just felt like, oh, I do this now, okay, and then move on, not really giving a shit what was happening overall, speaks volumes. When I think about why these dungeons felt so special to me, I think this has a lot to do with the aforementioned pace of the game in how long it literally takes you to get to a level high enough to handle it, but also the speed at which it takes to go through the dungeon. Even just getting to the dungeon in some cases is half the adventure, especially if you are teaming up to go do a dungeon in enemy territory. And the pace of the dungeons was often to do with the organic social element that Vanilla Classic promotes. I mentioned it in the overworld, but you literally aren't going to get anywhere in a dungeon unless you have put in a bit of social effort to find party members to go in with. And then once in, I found there was a lot of conversation around how to tackle this next bit or what to target in which order, which in a modern day WoW is just bypassed altogether, other than stopping to fucking rinse someone if they dared to do the wrong thing by accident. So having to actually speak to people to assemble a team and then waiting for everyone to arrive at the dungeon's physical location and then finally being able to go in and work through the challenge together adds to the auspicious nature of the event and that feeling of achievement. And just like how a joke or comedy feels funnier when there are other people around to hear it and laugh with you, so does the achievement feel more rewarding when you can share that achievement with other players. You may not become life friends with these people, but you do have to afford them a certain amount of respect when you enter into these temporary social contracts with each other. I mean, obviously there are still some dicks, but that's life on the internet, I guess. I ended up playing through the Dead Mines and Black Fathom Deeps as a druid tank because we couldn't find one and I was coached through it and actually ended up having a good time. This goes back to how the original version of the game taught me to be a better player. I was forced out of my comfort zone a bit. Now, of course, you can probably get so good at the game as to make these dungeons trivial, but just to reiterate, within my experience, it was the challenge and effort required that made them special. I keep thinking about having a little crew and journeying deep into Horde territory to where you don't have any easy access to flight paths and then running a dungeon like Wailing Caverns and how much more of an achievement that must feel. And speaking of enemy territory, just the whole setup of having the Alliance and the Horde provide a certain spice that just doesn't seem to be there anymore. I didn't play on a PvP server, then where I did adventure into contested territory it was super chill, but even just the very concept of being in enemy territory makes things a bit more exciting. I was admittedly slightly overpowered for it, but at a certain point in Ashenvale, you are handed a quest in which you had to essentially do an assassination on some undead slag in the Barrens within Horde territory. You go to access that part of the map and you are chased away and attacked by a couple of guards. Then you find a little sort of back entrance just off to the side of that and you really feel like a sneaky little bastard as you slide into the Barrens from Ashenvale and make your way over to the mountain where the air is thick with red dust and the atmosphere is great and it feels genuinely interesting to carry out your mission. Every time you're in Dionysus or Stormwind or any city or town, you see the NPCs walking around tagged as PvP, and it just made me think of what it must have been like back in the day when you and your guild literally raised an army and went adventuring into enemy territory and performed a literal raid on that location. It must have taken so much effort to, say, take down Stormwind or Ogrimmar. Look at these examples. The amount of coordination required, flowing over the land as they storm into Undercity, how exciting to be part of, but also to witness perhaps. I have seen similar sights in something like Guild Wars 2 witnessing a hero points train or meta event, but never have I seen such things in WoW. I love seeing the Horde players shouting out and organising themselves as they travel out on the Zeppelin into the Stranglethorn Vale and then up the path into Dustwood and through Elven Forest and into Stormwind where they... Oh dear. These videos were both from only a few years ago relatively, but I imagine back in the day when it was first released, this type of activity would have been fucking thrilling. And I mentioned it not long ago in relation to getting to dungeons, and again for the example of forming up and travelling across continents to reach enemy strongholds to raid. But the fact that you have to travel, and that travel is either on foot, ground mount, zeppelin or boat to get to your location creates a true feeling of adventure and gives a real sense of scale to the world. In Vanilla Classic, travel hasn't yet been trivialised by flying, and I do genuinely feel like it is better for it. One quest that I picked up in Desolus, Brutal Politics, had me picking a side in a big beef between various centaur factions, and once I had completed numerous quests and gained friendly status with that clan, I was then sent on a quest to the Swamp of Sorrow to kill an NPC and retrieve an item. As it turns out, this quest was all the way back over into the eastern continent and through the Deadwind Past and into the swamp. Mechanically, there wasn't a lot different to many of the other quests in the game, but the fact that it used the full extent of the map and the world available really left a mark on me as something sort of special about the vanilla game. Long-winded and slightly annoying? Yes. Special and inventive? Also yes. It feels a bit cheesy to say, but aside from the skill trees and combat and storylines, the real star of the World of Warcraft is the World of Warcraft. As I played it, I kept comparing it to the various expansions, especially the most recent 3, and it just feels like so much thought and design went into those early areas of the game, like Elwyn Forest and Westfall, compared to the Battle for Azeroth or Shadowlands, and even though they are an improvement, Dragonflight and the War Within. The War Within does start to approach something a little more interesting, but they still cannot match the scale or wonder that those original 2 continents provide. A real masterclass in mmorpg environments. But it isn't perfect. There are lots of missing quality of life features. I say missing because no one really knew they were missing when they first developed the game, of course, but when you look back on it with the benefit of hindsight, the absence of things like quest markers, arrows to guide you to objectives, and other little bits and pieces which make the modern version of the game a little bit more accommodating are absent. Obviously, some of these things were essentially added into the game through the modding scene, but I have not and in all likelihood will not ever use these, so I can't comment on the mods themselves, but certainly their development would imply that they are features that were desired and indeed over the years have ended up being added to the game by Blizzard themselves. But as for me, I remain pure. And with Blizzard seemingly moving to remove the need for mods in general in recent times, will likely stay pure. Another one of those quality of life things that now exists in the game but was not available originally is the Dungeon Group Finder. Now, obviously in the version of the game that I am playing, there is a group finder, but unlike the modern group finder where you are just thrown at head-spinning speed directly into whatever instance or activity you are looking for with strangers, this one is more in keeping with the spirit and flow of the classic version of the game. I think this is objectively a better way of doing it, as you do have to engage in the social contract and do a bit of legwork to arrange a group, but the group finder just makes it a little easier to connect to people. But back in the day, you would have had to have used forums or area chat to advertise and then whisper to other players to form your groups. But while this is better than the cold, unfeeling version of the group finder in retail in some ways, it, and indeed the whole dungeon running process, did present me with some overall issues. As a solo player, and not just a solo player but an older player, and not just an older solo player but a slightly miserable bastard who doesn't particularly enjoy forced social engagement with people I don't know, the long drawn out process of finding a group, waiting for the right amount of DPS, healer and tanks, and then running the dungeon itself required me to dedicate a considerable amount of time to it. Time that I just didn't have or didn't want to give it. I couldn't guarantee that if I had half an hour to play, I would be able to find, assemble, and then execute a dungeon in that time, which I think highlights the importance of joining an active guild, which does make it a little easier to find reliable people to play with. Which leads me to my next gripe, and probably the biggest one. It just takes so much time. At first, it was slow but enjoyable, a speed you could almost luxuriate in. But then I hit the 30s and Stranglethorn Vale, and suddenly it didn't feel as fun anymore. It felt like leveling just slowed to a crawl, which also points back to my previous point of dungeons, because no doubt if I had been actively running dungeons regularly, that would have most definitely sped the process up. But if your schedule doesn't fit in with others, then you can forget that idea. And dungeons as a speedy way of leveling isn't that speedy if you have to spend most of the time you could be doing quests just sitting outside the dungeon entrance waiting to find a healer. And whilst in Stranglethorn, something else revealed itself to me, and that was that while I accept that in general most, if not all, quests in Vanilla Classic are quite grindy, the grinding quests got way too grindy. Drop rates in Classic are quite unforgiving anyway, but killing endless amounts of dickheads looking for jungle remedies and pages from a cunting book nearly broke me entirely. I mean, it kind of did. I literally just left the jungle and got on a boat and went to Ashenvale to find somewhere else to quest. Originally, when the game first came out, the subscription fee and box price was the way in which Blizzard made their money, so obviously they wanted to get as much game time out of each subscriber as they could, hence the maddening drop rates and the ever more grindy quests. All these issues make it very clear to me why the changes and decisions were made and implemented over the years. So that brings me to retail. So what do I like about retail? Well, I'm probably going to contradict myself a little bit here at times, but first of all, the look and aesthetic. I have said before in another video I made about fishing minigames that I love the look of World of Warcraft. What does aesthetics have to do with fishing, you're probably not saying? Why, thanks for not asking. I'd be happy to tell you. Part of the ranking process for each fishing minigame was the look and feel of the environment and how it just felt to exist in that space. Was it relaxing? As all fishing minigames perhaps should be. And while WoW's fishing is overwhelmingly basic, its looks are, in my opinion, amazing. I liked the original graphics in Classic when it first came out all those years ago, and I have loved every iteration that has come since, each time improving on the last. Some people think that the look is too cartoony, but I love the consistent and cohesive stylized style. There are some beautiful environments in Legion and BFA, but I have at times just stopped to appreciate the ground clutter in some of the areas in Dragonflight and War Within. The colours are bright and colourful, which is something I have always liked in games ever since my preference for the juicy, colourful sprites of the Super Nintendo over the slightly more muted palette of the Sega Mega Drive. There is just something about the Warcraft style that I love. I will take stylised over realism any day of the week. The next thing that I really enjoy about retail is the flow of the combat. Now don't get me wrong, it is still tab target and it is no Guild Wars 2, but it is enjoyably smooth and quite relaxing. Well, at the level I play it anyway. Obviously gone are the ammo requirements, dead zones for firing weapons, hunters especially are far more mobile and easygoing. And hear me out, but all this goes towards perhaps one of my favourite things about the game, which is the brainless sort of turn your mind off element that allows me to mindlessly run around killing mobs and cruising about with a podcast on the other screen. I know this is sort of antithetical to the whole concept of playing a video game in the first place, particularly one like an mmorpg that sort of demands so much of your time, but simultaneously we all like to play and enjoy games in different ways, and overworld mmorpg PvE cruising is one of my personal favourite relaxing pastimes. And a big part of all this is the quality of life improvements brought in to address some of the friction that I brought up in Vanilla Classic. Because that friction is what hurt and changed my opinion on some of the other areas of the game that I had been enjoying, i.e. the slower pace with the feeling of achievement. That feeling of achievement meant fuck all once my patience had been ground into the dirt by the fucking grind in Stranglethorn Vale. Things like map markers, quest zones marked on maps, being able to mouse over an enemy and see whether it was part of the quest you were currently on. I know I mentioned the vanilla way of giving a sense of achievement, but having the friction taken out is, if I'm being honest, pretty nice. Just things being a bit less grindy in general, especially in terms of drop rates and stuff, not having to feel frustrated that someone has stolen the kill that you need to complete a quest. I don't miss that, however big the sense of achievement might be. Sure, there may be achievements that you have to grind for later on, but not during the leveling process. One of the best features of the modern game that I really appreciate is the ability to take NPCs into dungeons, allowing you to learn dungeons or just run them without pressure of having to be available on other people's schedules or the pressure of having to perform to an expected standard once in the dungeon by other players. I mean, you can also learn different roles within those dungeons as well. Maybe you want to learn how to be a healer or a tank without the pressure provided by expectation. And while I mentioned the group finder had become a bit soulless and had its downsides, it does also on the flip side make it a lot faster and easier to find and get to dungeons or other events. So no more sitting outside a dungeon for half an hour waiting for your group to arrive. I am honestly struggling to think of things I really like about the game outside of those things I've already mentioned. Certainly not as many come to mind as they did for Vanilla, which I suppose is indicative of it losing its soul a bit, I guess. Now I can list things I don't like so much about it, but a lot of these things are based on my recent experience with Classic. Had I not played Classic, would I have had these gripes that I'm about to tell you about? Perhaps I should have made this list before I started playing Classic, but we are where we are. But whilst many of these additions have removed the friction and frustration from the older style of gameplay, they have, in many cases, gone a bit too far. The class and specialisations, something that have gone through many overhauls, are not as good as they originally were. Whatever way you look at it, there aren't really as many options as it would first appear. We have the skill tree system back, sort of, but unlike the OG, where you had almost complete freedom to invest points where you would like to across the discipline trees, you are now made to choose one particular tree to work within, one specialisation. There are options and you do have a couple of different builds you could technically make within them, but it isn't the same. It feels like the illusion of freedom rather than freedom itself. And I know I moaned about vanilla being slow, especially at higher levels, but the speed at which you progress in retail is fucking ridiculous. Like to the point of insignificance. Nothing means anything. Shit is popping off at such an alarming rate, and it isn't just your XP bar that zooms all over the place. It is now the mounts as well. As fun as dragon riding feels, and it is pretty fun, if you try and engage with any zone other than the Dragon Isles and the most recent expansion, those zones that were designed with dragon riding in mind, things just feel absolutely trivial now. When playing through Vanilla, I really enjoyed travelling about in Westfall, and despite me not remembering it being so when I played it back in the day, this zone is not only very pretty actually, but really enjoyable and well designed. Now in retail, if you level through the original continents, Westfall has been rendered pointless, where I can go from where old fucking Binky or whatever the fucking horse was called to old Murkai in a fucking heartbeat. And dragon riding has sort of rendered all other mounts pointless. I got a really cool crocodile mount from the cosmetic store, and I just always look at it and think, when the fuck am I going to use that? I'll tell you when. Never. That's when. Why would I ride it on the ground when I can just fly very quickly in the sky? And even though I die plenty because I have serious concentration issues and am prone to the odd derp attack, it still doesn't really provide the same sort of challenge as vanilla did, and so there is less feeling of achievement. The speed at which things happen, the lack of any real challenge, is all in aid of one thing: they want you to be in the most recent expansion. And while the time walking function is good and allows you to try and engage with other expansions the game has to offer, the constant pressure to just funnel you straight into the most recent expansion is the biggest problem with the game as it stands. The problem that every expansion and every quality of life improvement just took us farther away from the great game it was, and even more upsetting is that many of these changes were made at the request of the player base. The inevitable curse of having to progress a live service and having to try and keep old content relevant, and by and large Blizzard failed. Stay with me, stay with me. Sure, this is a problem that all MMORPGs face really, but it just feels to me that with each new expansion, WoW creeps further away from the original zones that made it so special. Games like Guild Wars 2 have you always level through the original zones when you start, which does come with its own set of issues, being that you have to get through that part of the game before you can start to experience the superior later expansions, but there are other methods available for you to level if you would like. So if you experience that process once with one character, you don't need to do it again. You can earn tomes of knowledge and stuff as you adventure with your main character, or play PvP matches or any other activity, and then use those to level up your alts. And Guild Wars 2 also has a daily/weekly reward system that allows you to gear up and earn cosmetics through a currency by sending you all over the different zones in the game, meaning you have a reason to visit these old zones, and you also ensure that there are other players in that area as well. But in Warcraft, apart from the odd festival event or going to tame a certain pet or collect a specific resource, there isn't a reason to go back. Starter zones are kind of a joke now. Northridge has none of the charm and does everything it can to rush you out the door. It has been updated technically, but it is empty and shallow, especially if you remember how it used to be. Which is the biggest shame, because the base world of Warcraft was legitimately great, and luckily still is in Vanilla Classic. But after having spent months playing through Classic, looking at the old zones in retail just fills me with immense sadness. So what do now? How do you fix it? How does anyone fix it? I'm inclined to believe that the hundreds of talented devs that work at Blizzard over the years are much better placed than me to come up with a solution. But one thing that I do know is that they kind of overcorrected when addressing the issues of the past. One thing that I haven't really mentioned yet, because we're talking about the gameplay of the two games rather than predatory business practices, and I'll spare you all one of my customary anti-capitalist rants, but that is that alongside gameplay changes that robbed it of its character, there was an intense campaign of aggressive monetization, which I think even if you are an avowed fan of capitalism, we can probably all agree that it has kind of ruined the game to some degree. But aside from that, I sympathise with the challenge of wanting to sell your latest expansion, but being aware of the fact that you don't want people to have to wade through potentially hundreds of hours to get to it. But you know, if I buy an expansion to a single player game, I gotta play the base game first, so I know these are different types of games, but still, maybe there should be a little bit more of a firmer stance and less bowing to the player base, and maybe more importantly, the money. Don't no one come at me about how much games cost to make. Sure, MMORPGs do have more costs attached to them, and upkeep and whatnot, but we can have a conversation about that once we have addressed shareholder bonuses. Making sure the fat cats have taken the biggest slice off the top first is what makes these games so expensive. Perhaps a modest reduction to their already insane fucking earnings would help to redress the balance, just like taxing the rich. Okay, so what do we get if we take all the elements from the two versions of the game that I like and sort of mash them together as if we're making some kind of delicious meatball out of two different types of meat? Slightly slower pace, more methodical with a little bit of resource management in order to bring back that feeling of achievement? More freedom in the skill trees to allow whatever combination of talents you want, whether it is effective or not? I applaud what they are currently doing, but I'd like them to go further. Bring back the factions and make the conflict between them more pronounced. As a fucking big woke head, I'm all for hands across the aisle and kumbaya and everything, but I do think the game was better when we were literally at each other's throats. Update all graphics to the current style and lean further into the stylized nature. Remove friction from the game in the form of better drop rates and less grind. Quality of life functions like quest markers, arrows and zones marked on the minimap. Slightly faster, mobile and more flowing combat. And further to that, I'd like to add a few ideas, which this might be controversial, but I would perhaps like to see dragon riding removed or relegated to a specific area, maybe the Dragon Isles, and tied to some sort of magical bullshit reason as for why you can only do it there. My thinking and desire would be to make it so that you would have to spend more time travelling to and from places in order to appreciate and experience more of the land and the environment, which is something that I really began to enjoy in vanilla. I don't mind it taking me longer to get somewhere, whether that's on a boat or whatever. I just don't like the other parts where I'm sitting around doing nothing or continually killing things waiting for something to drop. I would also like to see the warband feature built out so that I could take them into dungeons as NPCs. I mentioned this in my video about the War Within expansion, and I think it would be great to be able to assemble my own squad and level them all up, providing a lot of extra reasons to play alts and invest more time into the game, especially for those of us that aren't into raiding and other such endgame activities. I would also perhaps propose a secondary XP bar or XP system for once you had leveled to max, a bit like champion points in Elder Scrolls Online. Perhaps they would give points to spend on skill synergies, but also rewards and cosmetics. My thinking here is to try and allow you to go back through all the other areas of the game and experience everything, but still get that dopamine hit and feeling of progression. Perhaps once you have reached max level, you then enter into a level scaling type deal where you can go around and play through all areas and experience the challenge while still allowing those important learning moments for new players where you wander into an area that you have no business being and get flattened in a heartbeat. You could leave the starter areas as they are and create level scaling for max level players everywhere else, but only once they've reached max level. I don't know, once again I would probably say that experienced devs know better than me, but some way of keeping all areas of the game relevant and therefore somewhat populated. So what is actually on the horizon for World of Warcraft? At present we are on the World Soul Saga, which is a 3-part series of expansions which should bring us to some sort of story conclusion. What that means for what comes after I don't know. The end? I would certainly welcome a Realm Reborn type scenario. Things have gotten so disparate and disjointed. I would love to see them nuke it all and bring the world back to one cohesive block, a fresh start. And what about Classic? Classic Plus? Classic Plus is essentially taking Classic and continuing developing it down a different path to what it originally went down, a sort of alternative history. Releasing new content and maybe even new expansions. There are private servers that already do this type of thing with stuff like Turtle WoW or maybe even Project Ascension, but might Blizzard do this themselves? I would say that it's probably highly unlikely given the amount of work that it would involve, but they have started to do stuff with the classic servers like Season of Discovery and things like remixes with different expansions, but that might be the best we get. And what about WoW 2, as it were? Will that ever be a thing? I was watching Preach do a video the other day talking about the possibility of WoW 2, and he is of the impression that they have been slowly working to implement WoW 2 under our very noses, and it won't be a new game as such, more a new era of the current game, with him positing something similar to what I mentioned a moment ago, with an event in the game that reshapes the world, something to do with the World Soul Saga itself. But I think I would like to see a completely new game. I think the gaming landscape has changed massively around what is popular and also advancements in technology. Is it time to start again fresh? Completely fresh? But if I'm honest, I think if you did develop a new WoW game for the modern day age, it would likely flop. It wouldn't be the Warcraft that the mostly aging fanbase love, and I don't think Blizzard can catch the same lightning in a bottle twice. I think the most pragmatic answer probably lies within retail and rolling it back a bit, as it were. Do away with the time walking and merge everything into one world again, like I already said. That would be an incredible amount of work to change quests and stories to fit them thematically into a one world scenario. But ultimately, you'll never make everyone happy. Perhaps having the classic and retail servers have kind of just made a rod for their own back, as you now have divided the player base into these two camps and sort of separated them. Sure, there is overlap and people that play both, but it is two pretty distinctive styles of gameplay at this point. So can you really merge them both again? Maybe the answer is to just play Guild Wars 2.
I joke, of course.
Or do I?
Blizzard has such a rich vein of data and experiences to pull from over 20 years of WoW that any other game would love to be able to draw upon. But we have seen what they did before, so why would we trust them again? I guess we'll just have to see what happens with the roadmap and where we are at the end of the next couple of expansions. But one day, it will be time for WoW to die, and for us to all move on. But judging by player numbers, that time isn't quite yet, and there is still life left in the old double-headed core hound yet. All I know is that I need a break from WoW, as across the two versions I have worn myself down. And as Propaganda sang recently on their new album, squeeze everything you can out of these fleeting years. Whatever you do, do it because you enjoy it, and if you don't, maybe it's time to move on.
Until the next expansion.
Thanks for watching. This one is a bit long in order to get all my feelings out, and I probably didn't really scratch the surface, and I am sure there will be stuff I forgot to mention, so get down there in the comments and let's continue to talk about it. How would you fix WoW? I'll be taking a bit of a break from Warcraft, so stand by for whatever I decide to do next, perhaps something about Street Fighter and fighting games. See you all on the next one.